This is an iHeart podcast. Guaranteed human.
Body Bags with Joseph Scott Moore. Probably one of my favorite Bible stories, Old Testament stories out there is one concerning Abraham. And it's fascinating to me, the story in particular, because it goes to the heart of, what you think about as far as the love of God and provisions and all those sorts of things. The story is actually Isaac, his son, being taken by Abraham to a specific location where, this is wild, where God has directed Abraham to sacrifice his son. And, when you think about it, you look at it, you think, well, this has to do with faith. It has to do with God's provision. Like, well, God, you hear people say in Christian circles, God will make a way. All right. You hear that a lot. And the name of that mountain where this sacrifice, where the Jewish faith believes this took place, is a place called Mount Moriah. And it's, I don't know, foundationally, it's a critical story that weaves itself all the way through the Bible, right? Well, today, I'm going to talk about another Mount Moriah. This Moriah doesn't necessarily have to do with God's provision. It has to do with a singular individual who sought to make a harvest from a cemetery named Mount Moriah. And the outcome is unbelievable. I'm Joseph Scott Morgan, and this is Body Bags. Hey, Dave, have I ever asked you this question, brother? And I teach a clandestine graves class at Jack State. And one of the first questions I ask my students is, tell me the difference between a graveyard and a cemetery. Have we talked about that before?
I don't know if we did on the air. I know off the air we talked about it, because I remember being confused as to kind of like coffin versus casket.
Casket, yeah.
And there is a difference. So.
Yeah, there is. And I'm fascinated by it because, a graveyard is supposed to be an area that is considered almost like consecrated ground. It's associated with a church, right? But a cemetery is a public area where, and I think that, and I'm probably going to get this wrong, but I think it goes back all the way. I think the root is in Greek.
Wow.
And it literally means like, I think it translates roughly into like city of the dead or something like this.
Wow.
And every culture, has always had to have a final resting place.
Right.
That is that, a culture that's kind of structured. And there's all kinds of, and I love reading about burials, ancient burials anyway. It's just
Jonathan Gerlach messed with all that, didn't he?
Yeah, it kind of did.
Holy. He had a story today that is about a grave robber.
Yeah.
And my first thought was Ed Gein, because that's kind of been top of mind. And yeah.
You were reading over my shoulder, or you were thinking, we've been doing this too long. We're starting to think the same, but go ahead, man, about Ed Gein.
Okay. Well, what we have is a story where the headline, 500 charges over bones being found. And then, you start looking at this, and you're not talking about some old guy living in a shack, with a lantern that goes out in the middle of the night stealing bones. We've got a guy who's apparently creating a business out of bones. And in this particular case, we've got a man named Jonathan Gerlach. Who is it? Gerlach or Gerlach? Have you heard it yet?
I would lean more into Gerlach. I think that pronunciation.
Jonathan Gerlach is 34 years old. He's from Pennsylvania, or living in Pennsylvania, and he has been charged with 496 counts, including 100 counts of abuse of a corpse. And You mentioned consecrated ground. Well, he was actually also charged with desecration and theft, sale of venerated objects. This guy was stealing bones and selling them. And Joseph Scott Morgan, I have so many questions for you about the terminology that I'm reading, police reports, news reports, that I'm a little shocked because I'm just going to use one term. When I hear the term corpse, I think of a corpse as being a dead body that still has flesh and is deteriorating. I picture, in all honesty, I picture them in clothing. You know, they've been buried and they're now a corpse. But in the same story, I'm hearing corpse and I'm hearing skeletal remains.
Yep.
To me, they seem totally different.
I think that no, please go ahead. I don't want to step on you. That was my
thing. No, but are they? Can you please, for the love, help me understand this terminology? Because I think it'll help me understand. I think it'll help all of us understand what's going on here.
Okay. I think that in most terminology, when you begin to think about a corpse, or let's break it down this way. When you have skeletal remains, that could technically be referred to as a corpse. Okay. Because it is the body, or all that remains, no pun intended, of the deceased. Okay. However, most of the time when you hear corpse, that implies that you're going to have more of an intact remain. Now, there's a bit to this that we need to kind of, I don't know, bad terminology, flesh out. I know, right?
Joseph Scott Morgan.
It's just, it's very gruesome stuff. I've had some interesting experiences over the years with human remains involving well-preserved remains that have in fact been embalmed, and you have skin that will be there, Dave. You'd be surprised how long that this might last.
Okay.
Where it's the skin is almost leather-like. Okay. I think that the bone portion of this, or the skeletal remain part of this, that is an indication of two things. Either the body was not well prepared prior to going into the crypt, or time. Okay. So where it would eventually render down. I've heard one comment, and I don't know how to validate this, because it doesn't, the age of this cemetery, Mount Moriah, it's in Delaware County, Pennsylvania. I don't know how to address the timing here, because one person had said that some of these remains could be up to 200 years old. Wow. And I'm thinking, I don't think that Mount Moriah was established until 1850. It's like a Victorian era. Okay. And it's probably, it's there. It was, for us, it was there prior to the Civil War. All right. So yeah, it's been there for a while, and they're adding bodies to it over all of these years. And embalming is kind of like it has progressed over the years, and the ability to preserve a body. There are many belief systems out there where people don't want bodies embalmed. They just want them to go directly into the ground. And if you're absent the embalming process, then you can have this degrading that takes place of these remains in pretty short order. Okay. So, and then you have this kind of natural, if the body is still casketed, you can have this kind of natural disarticulation that takes place. So let's just say that you and I went to a cemetery, and we were tasked with the idea of exhuming a remain, and they've asked us, they give us the necessary tools. We go into, say, for instance, a mausoleum, which is different than a regular ground burial, and we take a crowbar and crack open the door, and then get in and pull the face off of the marble, crypt there. And we, try to pull out the remainder of what remains of that casket or coffin. And we get, we crack this thing open and we look inside. Some of the stuff is going to be very well contained. You might even see bits of flesh, but the further back in time that you go, you're not going to see the preservation of remains like you would. I've had some fascinating cases over the years. I remember I had a plantation owner's wife, Dave, that died in a typhoid epidemic in South Louisiana, and her remains were actually exhumed. I'm sorry?
Was her name Mary?
I don't think her name was Mary.
Typhoid Mary.
No. But she was very young. I think that when she died, it's an older gentleman that married her, and she was only like 18, I think.
Wow.
Well, she died prior to the Civil War, and this is in South Louisiana where, remains go pretty quickly. She was so well embalmed. She was in a lead casket. I'll never forget this. And it had viewing window panes on the top of it. So you could look through the window pane or the panes of glass. And the panes of glass, I've seen others of these. Panes of glass were actually still intact with her. Many times they'll split over a period of time. They'll crack. Because, glass is not a solid like we think of a solid. People think of solids, with glass. Mm-hmm. Do you know that glass migrates over a period of time? If you go into like old homes, for instance, like before glass was kind of tempered, if you go into really, really old homes, and I know friends out there will have seen this because it's striking when you see it. When you look through a window or a glass pane in a hole, and the glass pane is still intact, the original. Did you know if you look through it, the glass is wavy? And at the bottom in particular, it's almost like the glass is semi-molten. It literally goes down like this. But anyway, I digress.
That's so cool.
The glass on this thing was still intact. And so when we got this thing open, Dave, she was Creole, if I remember correctly, which is a grouping of people in South Louisiana. Another story for another day. She had this beautiful, beautiful, thick black hair. Now, I'm making comment about a woman that died in the 1850s, Dave. Mm-hmm. Just let that sink in.
Yeah.
I could appreciate the length of her hair. And in the top of the hair, her hair had been put up with a whalebone comb in the top like this and gathered like that. And you could still appreciate she was wearing a white dress, and there were still bits of skin that you could see.
What?
Yeah. And they look like overly tanned leather,
right.
But, I've had other exhumations that I've worked where people have died, within 2 years, and the body you can tell the body was festering in there. And a lot of it has to do where the body is laid to rest. Is it subterranean? Is it above ground? All these sorts of things. But back to this case, up in Pennsylvania, it's, a thought that came to me, Dave, with this guy, and you were talking about how he's young, he's in his 30s, and he's creating a business. Dave, as horrible as this is, I'm going to go ahead and say it. It's almost like that cemetery looked like Costco or Sam's Club to him.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
He's just walking through aisle after aisle and trying to determine what's going to be the best area I can target. And he has a specific thing that he's looking for, Dave. He wants the history of it, because if he can get the history of it, he can kind of stamp this. He can memorialize it, because with history comes value. But when you begin to think about the problems that the investigators now have on their hands, they're going to think, Lord, this is too high a price to pay. Years ago, I had a homicide that had occurred in Atlanta. And it was during the Final Four. It was being played in Atlanta. And these two guys essentially kidnapped and robbed a fellow that was in town for the game or games. And much like Pulp Fiction, if you've ever seen the movie where, Samuel Jackson says to John Travolta's character, "Man, you shot Marvin in the face." Well, in this particular case, the guy that was kidnapped, he was in the backseat of his own vehicle, and one of these guys popped him in the car. And when he popped him in the car, it created all kinds of evidence. Well, jump forward, and I'm talking about blood, bone, brain, supersaturated area. Jump forward like 3 days. This guy's been missing. People are looking for him. And up in Ohio, we're talking about going all the way from Atlanta to Ohio by car. I think it was in Ohio, Indiana or Ohio. State trooper pulled this car over because they were weaving. They were breaking center line. And he approached the car. And Dave, when he did, he looked in and he saw this gore, this just horror show in the back seat. And they were able to effect an arrest based upon that. And that comes back to a principle within investigations that's called plain view doctrine. And it kind of holds that anything that a police officer sees that's indicative of a crime that has been committed or there's little or no explanation, they can proceed with the case without an immediate warrant. They can detain the people. And so can you imagine walking up to the car and the back seat is just inundated, super saturated with blood. You've got probably particulated pieces of brain, and brain they stand out because in contrast to blood, because you've got people hear about gray matter. You've also got white matter that is below the level of the gray matter. So they're shining their light. And I can only imagine this is reflecting back. And immediately I can feature this trooper like immediately putting his hand on his pistol and saying, "Okay, driver, exit the vehicle."
Right.
Yeah. Something's afoot. But plain view comes into play in this case up in Pennsylvania, doesn't it?
The thing that gets me about this whole thing, it's why I have a lot of questions, Joe, because you realize that this came from a tip. Somebody picked up the phone and called police. And it started with flies. There were flies all around Gerlach, where Gerlach lives. And it was the flies. And think about it's the first week of January.
Yeah.
In Pennsylvania.
Yep.
And you got flies. A lot of flies. Enough that it draws attention of neighbors. So I'm thinking about that right off the start, because you just don't have, that's not a normal thing.
No.
And that actually takes me to where I was headed with the whole thing of what condition these remains are found in and the different terminology. So when police see Gerlach, they actually catch him in the act, and you mentioned, you mentioned crowbar earlier. And just so you know, friends, on January 6th at 8 p.m., in Delaware County, Pennsylvania, Detective Chris Carr is surveilling Mount Moriah Cemetery. Obviously, something's been going on there and another cemetery. And so now they're watching. They're putting some little things together.
Yeah.
And what do they see? Well, they see Gerlach coming out of the cemetery. And he's got bones. And in the back seat of his car, in plain view for all the world to see, there's bones. There's a crowbar, a burlap bag, other assorted items, which I'm kind of wondering what those are. But there was enough in the back seat, Joe.
Screwdriver.
Yeah. And the thing is that it started with a tip. hey, my neighbor's got a bunch of flies. Something bad's going on. Now, there's part of that is left out because the smell's going to be. If there's flies, there's smell.
Yeah.
And you've got thousands of flies in a time and area where you wouldn't normally have them. And they call the police. Now, the police are watching. And by this time, it's not like on January 6th that the cemetery was broken into for the first time. I've been looking back at this, the break-ins of the mausoleums and then the cemeteries began November 7th and existed through his arrest on the night of January 6th. So we got 2 months of cemeteries, 2 different cemeteries having bones stolen. And I can't imagine, Joe, that when he leaves the cemetery that he's a Boy Scout leaving no sign, nothing behind but memory.
Yeah.
There's got to be something left behind. They got to know.
I got to tell you, I was kind of intrigued by the fact that, they mentioned, you hear all of these stories that have come out about this. And one big thing I'd like to make mention of here is this crowbar. First off, a lot of people don't know this. Did you know that there are statutes within many states where they classify burglary tools?
Yeah.
Like they have burglary tools, and crowbars and pry bars are like
Joe,
top of the list.
First time I ever paid attention to that terminology.
Yeah.
Ted Bundy in Ohio.
Yep.
When he got pulled over in the Volkswagen, and he jackrabbited, and when they pulled him over, they noticed the passenger front seat was out, and he had a bag of burglary tools.
Burglary tools. Yep. Yeah, and it goes back, and they've known this for a long time. And the fact that he had that, I've also heard that he had a screwdriver. I'd like to know how robust a screwdriver is. But here's the thing about it is they have actually recovered tools. Okay. Well, my friends, and I love to talk about these people because I'm fascinated by them in forensics. Our friends in the tool mark section they're going to have a field day with this, because at Pennsylvania State Crime Lab is where this is all going to happen. It feels to me like he's going into actually above ground mausoleums now, because we don't hear anything about shovels, right? We don't hear about, taking, I guess you could take a crowbar and you could pry a slab up. He doesn't look like a big fellow. If you've ever seen a slab that goes over the top of a subterranean burial, you got to be robust, to say the very least. All right. I mean, you got to have muscles popping outside of your neck if you're going to, and most of the time it's not a one-man job. I have seen them where they'll pop the top off this thing and it'll crack, and it'll come apart in a couple of pieces. It'll literally fracture. And some of these things, and here's kind of first off, you should never step on a grave. I believe it's disrespectful, but just be warned, if you ever go to a graveyard and you see one of these kind of grounded slabs on the ground, don't step in the center of it. That's the weakest spot. And you could find yourself falling down into the grave if you do this, depending upon the quality of these things. But it seems to me like he's going actually into a built structure, because he's using a crowbar and probably a screwdriver to try to work a lock, more than likely. So every one of those doors, or even if he's used it to pry the crypt open, Dave, they're going to leave scratches. Okay. And those scratches can actually be tied back to that crowbar, the crowbar that they found. And one of the things that you find out about criminal behavior when it comes to tools, whether it's the dismembering of a body or the methodology that they use to kill somebody, if they're repeating these events kind of serialized, they don't like to stray away from what they feel comfortable with. Yeah. So, this is my prize crowbar. It's kind of akin to somebody that has their own workshop, and maybe they have a tool that they like to do beveling with. They're building furniture, whatever it is. Well, that's the tool that they like to use. This is no different. This guy, if you look at him, so, I think that he has targeted these locations that have easy access, because he's trying to make money by extricating anything that he can from them. And keep in mind, if it's a mausoleum, Dave, this is kind of fascinating. Mausoleums are not meant for poor folks. Okay.
Right.
You don't have street urchins that are buried in mausoleums unless some rich person has taken pity on this person years and years ago. I've been in some mausoleums and visited these things, and I'm talking about old time mausoleums. I'm not talking about kind of the modern, where people pick out a space and they're stacked in there. I'm talking about family mausoleums.
Right.
And that's a very Victorian thing to do. I mean, mausoleums have existed back into our ancient history. Okay. They have. All you got to do is look at the pyramids. All right. But in the Victorian age, it was cachet to have these things. And it was a display of wealth, and power, and your name is engraved above the door. I've been in some of these things that are literally opulent. I mean, they're remarkable when you see them. One interesting thing about mausoleums I've always been fascinated with, some of them will have a great big faceplate on the door that's got an insert location for an old-fashioned skeleton key.
Wow.
And you can take the key, and work the lock. I don't know how hard it is to get into these things because those locks are rather robust. But if you've got a crowbar, and many of these doors are like cast metal as well. Wow. You'll have them that are steel, but you'll have others that are made out of a variety. I've seen one that was all copper.
Wow.
Many times they'll have panes of glass. Now, I urge anybody, if you've ever been, I like visiting cemeteries. It's just a thing that I have. I like the art of it. And plus I'm from New Orleans, and cemetery tours are a big deal down there. If you ever get a chance, please do yourself a favor and go visit the cemeteries in New Orleans. It'll blow your mind. Some of these things have glass, have windows where you can actually look in. I've looked in one, Dave, that gave me really creeped me out. I remember looking in and I noticed that somebody was looking back at me. And there was actually a portrait stand in there with a gigantic portrait of this beautiful woman that had probably been in there for 120 years, if I remember the dates correctly. And she's sitting there and she's looking back at the door like this. So when you look into the mausoleum, she's staring back at you. So just that alone, and the point here is that I'm thinking from the perspective of how much money could be made, because the more opulent the structure, it implies that there's going to be more value. And also, I think this guy's taking jewelry as well. I'd like to know also from an investigative standpoint, did he go to the local, I don't know where you would go, to the control point for Mount Moriah and begin to look at how long these particular graves had been there, who was buried in these graves, and did he do research on the individuals to try to bracket them in a financial area so that he could say, okay, there might be a lot of valuables in here. I know that there's this many bodies in here. See how detailed this thing can get? If he's this kind of, if this is the enterprise that he's involved in. For my money, Dave, I don't know that there's anything creepier in the world than a basement in an old house. There's just some attics are one thing, but basements in particular, you're descending that staircase. I think some of it has to do with the fact that you don't know if there's a single way into this thing. You might not be able to get out. You're down there, and your mind creates these these fictions where you're thinking, something's going to get in between me and the staircase, so I can't get out of here. But Dave, when the police actually, served the warrant on Gerlach's home, Gerlach's home, they descended into his basement, and there's also indication that he was utilizing a storage facility somewhere nearby as well. So, okay, so let me get this straight. You've been at this so long that you've populated your basement with all of these bodies and body parts. Oh, by the by, you've also got a storage unit where you're putting human remains in as well. You know, I don't know that they've completely revealed how many remains there actually are. And even though they're talking about Mount Moriah Cemetery, there's another cemetery. Dave, we don't know that that's all of the cemeteries, right, brother. We really don't at this point in time.
There are at least two cemeteries. That's what we do know. At least two. But going back to the tipster, okay, and I don't know if this was one person calling in a tip or if it was multiple people, but we do know that police were informed of information that they were able to back up when they went in there. You mentioned, I mentioned the flies earlier. Well, police got this tip that mentions a partially decomposed corpse hanging in Gerlach's basement. And that same tip is the one that told them, he traveled to Chicago to sell a human skull. Now, the information from the person who called in the tip was enough for them to dig in deeper. I hate to say that, but to go further into the investigation.
Wait, hang on. Where did he go to sell the skull? He went to Chicago, right?
Yeah, he went to Chicago from where he was in Pennsylvania. But, Joe, you were talking about going into the basement and weird things. Do you remember the story we did? It was about the guy, Joseph Bannis and Jeffrey Munt.
Yeah.
When they killed that guy.
Absolutely.
I'm thinking, okay, in this particular case, and that one where they murdered the guy and buried him, they put him in a tub, dug a hole, put him in there in the basement and covered it up. Well, this is like the opposite of that. This guy is hanging him where everybody can see. There's actually, what he is doing is so nothing to him that he actually has somebody he has invited into his home that sees a corpse hanging and knows that he sold a skull in Chicago. But this is where I go back to the corpse versus skeleton, Joe. What was hanging and how long? I mean, we know that the beginning of what they can prove was the first grave robbing was November 7th of 2025.
Yeah.
And the last one was the night he was caught, January 6th. So but in that time period, they can isolate the number of cemeteries that have been broken into, and they can at least start with something like that. And that might give them an idea as to who these parts of skeletons and bones belong to.
Yeah, that's going to be...
How are you going to identify 100-year-old
okay. Skeleton? All right, let's break it down from this perspective. If he's got let's just say that he's got a set of human remains. Now, I don't know what the status would be. Okay, maybe they're folded in together with very little what could be termed as soft tissue. Who knows? That still you still have the sinew there, if you will. All right, that's still connecting. Now, that remain, if they get that isolated, because he might be saying, you never know what his sales pitch is. Hey, I've got an entire human remain out of a coffin or out of a casket. I want to sell you. All the parts are intact. Hey, I've even got the burial clothes. The body is still in the burial clothes. It's like, but wait, there's more, that kind of thing. Whereas if you've got other remains that are there, this is something that we refer to as commingling of remains. Commingling of remains is where you get multiple burials, and most of the time this happens like in a mass grave, okay, where bodies will begin to break down and the turbation of the earth, the bodies begin to kind of roll underground, all these, and water flow and all that stuff, and you get this big mishmash of remains. But that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about a guy that specifically, methodically went into these locations. I'm really wondering if he had specific, and this goes back to the thought about research. I'm wondering if he has specific identifiers, because that's like a pitch. Okay. Just think about it from a sales position. That's like a pitch. I've got a lady that was approximately 43 years old at the time of death. She comes from a family, a wealthy industrialist. She mingled with the Astor family in New York, or whatever whatever big family there was back in Philly in the day. Okay. And so that's a point of sale.
Wow.
And if you can take that and you can validate that, maybe these people want validation. I'm curious about this skull that he sold in Chicago. Here's one other thing. Why would you drive it to Chicago? That seems as though that would blow your profit margin all to hell if you're driving all that distance. How much was he getting for this skull? Are we talking $1,000 for a skull? Well, yeah. I mean, if you're talking about putting gas in your car and driving all that way, yeah, it'd be worth it. But if you're selling a human skull for $100 and you're driving all the way from the Philly area to Chicago, you know what I'm saying? I'm looking at this not just as a forensics guy. I'm looking at this trying to understand the business principle, because this is so weird for us in the sense of how we normally handle multiple remains. I'm wondering what level of organization he had, Dave. Now, going back to and I know that this is a question that's gnawing at everybody's brain in this. How will, in fact, these bodies be specifically identified? Well, you know where I'm going with this.
Mm-hmm.
I'm thinking about forensic genetic genealogy because, and do you remember the Othram case that we had, the woman in the well? Do you remember that? From Canada, where she had last been seen just after World War I, and they found her down in that well?
Yeah.
Well, Othram actually did her DNA, and remember that story, how the cops just showed up at like the great granddaughter's door. Yeah. Can you imagine that?
Wow.
So if these people are plugged in on any level, with a genetic sample out there, are they going to go this far? Are they going to seek out the assistance of someone like Othram or Othram themselves? It all depends on what they can tie back. Now, I can guarantee you this, Dave, there will be a forensic anthropologist, probably a whole team of them, that will get involved in this. And there's a couple of really good programs, university programs up in PA. I know they're going to drag that skill set to bear, because there's not a lot that a forensic pathologist could do here. You're not trying to assess injuries. Okay. What you're trying to do is age the skeletal remains. You're trying to sex the skeletal remains. You're trying to, here's another big one. When I say age, it's not just like the age, how long has this person been dead, or how long could they have been buried? What was their age at the time of death? Because that's going to be a big point of interest here to try to understand. Well, we've got Mary Martin Murphy, who her grave is robbed, and we know that she was 32 when she died. Is there a skull in here, first off, that is whatever her race is, let's say white, and they're going to look at her teeth. They're going to say, yeah, this person might be 30 to 45 years of age. We know that this is a female skull, all these sorts of things. And maybe she had some kind of history of a fractured skull, or something happened to her skull in life. Are there identifiers where you can go back? Well, genetically, if they can get samples off of this, that's certainly going to be fascinating. Here's another thing, Dave, that it just kind of popped into mind. I'm kind of spitballing here right now. Forgive me. But this environment that this rocket scientist has allegedly, and he's just been charged, he hasn't been convicted, has introduced himself in, is a rather toxic environment. All right. And I don't mean toxic in the touchy-feely way. I'm talking about when you consider the chemical stew that was used way back when to embalm bodies. We're talking about heavy metals, mercury, those sorts of things.
Wow.
That now he's
talk
actually
about arsenic and old lace, man.
Yeah. You begin to think about, he's actually, and I don't know if he's using gloves, and it doesn't really matter, because if this stuff is, if he's sawing on these bones, Dave, he's going to create a histamine, and that can be inhaled. All right. And anybody that's in this environment, you're going to have to get, I would imagine, this is just me spitballing here, I would imagine that the state of Pennsylvania is going to have to get their version of the EPA, or maybe the federal EPA, to come in and clean this house, or well, they won't clean it, but they'll come in and say, you have to clean it because based upon our testing here, this is what we're finding in here. Do you see how extensive this thing is? Because they've cracked open these graves. There was no prohibition against using these chemicals in embalming back then.
It's
and anything else. And not just that, but the neighborhood where this guy lived. Let's just think about the storage facility.
Yeah.
All of the surrounding storage areas there, these things might be highly contaminated as well.
Wow. Joe, so I just don't see how this began on November 7th and ended January 6th. I just don't see it happening in that.
No.
I mean,
I agree, brother. I'm not buying it.
No, there's got to be something else here. And too much was done. That's a lot. There's a lot of charges here, and they don't do that. They don't just throw these things around. I'm talking about the police. You've got it. You got charging documents and everything else that spells out a case. But in this case, Joe, we're going to be working this one for a while.
I think so. And I also think that I would really be interested if there was anybody else involved in this enterprise.
Yeah.
Because, there was a Facebook group that was created or that he kind of interjected himself into. We don't know a lot about it at this point in time, but we do know that there is a Facebook group associated with this where, he was featured. I think there's even an image of him. Was it posted on this Facebook group where he's holding a skull?
Yes.
And again, who's facilitating this?
And now on the Facebook page, Joe, it says, if you purchased anything from Jonathan Gerlach, contact the FBI.
Yeah. So now, the EPA is going to show up. I can read this a mile away. The feds are involved in this. And plus, Dave, this is one other thing. This is illegal interstate commerce as well. Just the fact the feds are onto this because he's traveled to Chicago, Dave, to sell a a part of a human body. So they're going to be all over this. This is going to be one. I don't know if it'll be for the record books. This is not the first time, certainly, that you and I have covered grave robbery, or at least the selling of human remains. But I don't recall if there's ever been one that so defiled graves to the point where it's broken down into dollars and cents, where somebody is using human remains in order to make a living off of them. I don't know. There's going to be much more revealed in this case. I can't wait, as a true crime person, as a forensic scientist in particular, to see the process. And I think that, Dave, we need to make a note of this. We need to do an entire episode on nothing but the identification of each individual remain and just walk through that process, because it is going to be overwhelming. If what we're hearing right now at this point in time with the number of remains that they allegedly have and that he had in his possession, all I can say is, friends, stay tuned. I'm Joseph Scott Morgan, and this is Body Bags.
This is an iHeart podcast. Guaranteed Human.